Hello everyone. Welcome to the second part of special moves in chess. In this video we shall discuss about En Passant. This is a French word, that's why it sounds like this. Now this is a special move, special capturing move of pawns. And this is this is the only move where the squares where the captured piece was and the capturing piece is going are different. Now let us understand the concept. Suppose it is white to move and suppose white plays a move like this, pawn to h4. Now this pawn on g4 is now able to capture the h4 pawn by just going to the h3 square. Okay, so now black plays h3. It is actually a capture. It is g takes h3. See how this happens? This pawn is going to this square and this h4 pawn is being captured. That is actually called En Passant. There are certain rules which needs to be followed. First of all, the point is that the pawn which is being captured through En Passant, it has to go 2 squares at a time. Okay? Not 1 square, but it has to go 2 squares at a time. So say suppose white is playing something like this, black plays a move like this, then white is pushing the pawn to the h4. Now this piece will not be able to capture the h4 pawn through En Passant, through anything. Okay, so this only happens when white has pushed the pawn 2 squares at a time, and on the very next move this pawn will be able to capture the h4 pawn. Remember, you have to perform the En Passant on the very next move. So suppose also white has played this, black had played something like this, white had played something like this, then black decides to perform En Passant. That is not acceptable, that is illegal. Okay, so you have to perform the En Passant on the very next move. So what are the 2 rules? The first rule is that white has to push the pawn 2 squares at a time. Not white, it may be for black also. So suppose we are looking it from black's perspective. Black has pushed the pawn 2 squares at a time. Now white will be able to capture it by just going to the square behind the black pawn, right? So this is also En Passant, but you have to do it on the very next move. So that is basically En Passant. Now what is the use of it? Why people has used this kind of weird move in chess? That is actually is in the name of En Passant. Okay, so let us understand why this kind of move is being played. Okay, so there is a concept in chess which is known as passed pawn. Okay, a passed pawn is when one side has a pawn which has no opponent pawn to resist it from going to the opposite rank. So suppose this pawn from white side, there is no opposite colored pawn on any of the 2 files which can resist this pawn to go to the last rank. So this d2 pawn will be called a passed pawn. Okay, that is pretty simple because there is no pawn to attack it. So this pawn can now move easily to the squares in front of it and reach the last square, the last rank. So this is a passed pawn. Now if there was some piece, say I am saying that this square, we are considering this pawn, okay, the e5 pawn, it is not a passed pawn, right? Because there is a pawn in this file adjacent to it and this pawn can resist this e5 pawn to go to the last rank. So the e5 pawn is not a passed pawn, whereas a d2 pawn is a passed pawn. Okay, so let us now consider this a2 pawn. Logically, what should happen? This is not a passed pawn, right? Because there is a pawn on the file adjacent to it. So this b7 pawn logically should resist this a2 pawn to reach the last rank. Pretty simple, right? Now let us see this thing. It is black to move. Say black plays this, white plays something like this, anything. Black plays this, and then white pushes the pawn to a4. Now if this b4 pawn is not able to capture this white a4 pawn, then this a4 pawn has become a passed pawn, right? Because now it is free to go to the last rank. There is no pawn that can resist it to go to the last rank. But logically we actually understood that a2 pawn is not a passed pawn. That is not acceptable, because that is actually creating a difference between theory and practical. So theoretically, this a2 pawn is not a passed pawn, but in reality it is becoming a passed pawn. That's why the theoreticians or the players, chess players, has invented this concept of En Passant, right? Suppose we are considering the same situation, b4 and a4. Now, as logically the a2 pawn was not a passed pawn, there should be some kind of law to prevent this a2 pawn from being a passed pawn. That's why this kind of movement b takes a3 happens, which actually prevents the a pawn from passing freely to the last rank. That's why this is called an En Passant. That is the purpose of En Passant. Okay, so we have understood what is En Passant, how it is performed, and we also have understood why is the name and why this kind of special move or weird move happens. So this is all for this video. I hope you have liked it. If you did, then please give it a like, share it with your friends and relatives. In case you have any question or suggestion, you can write it down on the comment section. I'll be looking forward to it. See you next time.